Okay, so we're up to the final bit of this assessment piece. You'll notice on this page in the instructions section some examples of drafts. We're a little bit behind, but here are some examples of previous students and some that I have made. Some are using ideas from the ideas bank. Others are a little bit wilder. I did a sort of a jazz blues version. I did a sort of a sad ballad in 2020. And I've got a new one that I just wrote today after our lesson. Let's look at where we all began. We pasted in our rhythms. In August, we started writing the words. A couple of weeks later, we finalised our words at the first checkpoint. I wrote these ones today. We started to put chords on the top and then just spit them out to a really simple straight block chord in Sibelius, just so we can hear them and play around with the melodies. And we started to make choices in the melodies that matched the chord. So I've gone through in the final version, and wherever there's a colour, in the final it's red. You don't have to do this in your final. I'm just doing it for teaching purposes. It shows you where there's a note that's not part of the chord, so it's creating a bit of a clash. Now remember, you really only have to do 2 lots of 8 bars of piano because all the A's are the same. And today we discussed this idea of repeating the final phrase and stretching out the rhythm, or even just simply stretching the rhythm out of the final phrase. So I could have put that section there. And then we were up to the stage of choosing piano ideas. The way to do that is to either look in the Sibelius Ideas Bank for piano or search online for piano ideas. And this was my suggestion, to go to musicnotes.com, type in music theatre and just snip out some ideas. So that was sort of a couple of weeks ago we started thinking like that. Here are some of mine, where they came from, and we discussed these today in class. In the end, I didn't use all of the ones I found, but I did make a file for myself of ideas. So if I look in the View Panels Ideas Bank, Score Ideas, you'll see a whole pile of ones that I notated, that I got from the internet, and then other ones from the Sibelius Ideas Bank that I thought might have something in them that I could use. I recommend some of these country ones or some of the pop ones could be potentially useful. So I just collected a whole pile of things, and there's an activity called editing a Sibelius idea. So here's a simple pattern. We've got C and G, the root and fifth bass line. We've got G's in the top, and then in voice 2 we've got G, C, E, C, E, G, the chords. Notes in arpeggio. So if I wanted to make this into an F chord in the key of C major, I could just move it up. Then I'd have the notes of the F chord and I'd just change the chord name. But if you wanted to use a C minor chord, then you'd actually have to know that C minor has C, E flat and G, and so you'd have to manually change them. And you would know which notes are in a chord by looking at what the Realize button popped out. So you just copy whatever you're seeing. That's the purpose of doing this whole layer, just to help you make sure you're spelling things properly. And then at the end, we just get rid of it, and because you've got your real piano part. I collected my ideas in a place, and that's the one that I've put in the OneNote, so you can use some of mine if you want. So once I was at this stage, I put in another piano that was blank, and I muted the lower piano. It's just a reference line for spelling purposes. And what I wanted to do then was copy and paste in accompaniment ideas. Now, I can just repeat that, can't I? But that's too boring. So what I'm looking for is some variation in the accompaniment. And today in class we talked about how piano accompaniments are somewhat similar to drum kit patterns. There's simple patterns, there's pattern variations, and there's fill or break bars that happen sort of towards the end of sections and towards the end of the whole piece. Have a look at this idea. There's a simple pattern, a pattern variation, a simple pattern, a sort of fill. So if I'm looking at a piano idea, this one is fairly busy, isn't it? This one is less busy, particularly the bass line. This one is also similar, not too busy. I could simplify that a little bit or even do that. I'm just looking to make a selection of patterns and put them into a bigger pattern. So in the end, my final accompaniment selection had about 6 or 7 ideas in it. And I've color-coded them so you can see. So it had a pair of block chords with a bit of syncopation, which came from one of those ones I collected. That bass line we were just looking at. A dotted minim plus a crotchet on a block chord. an arpeggiation, root, fifth, root, and a non-chordal note. This one, which had sort of like a note and an arpeggio tied to a chord. Just a really plain semi-breve, though sometimes I did put the arpeggiation mark on it, and other times I didn't. Those were all bits of these. Can you see that? I used this blue one quite a lot and this orangey one quite a lot, although sometimes I turned that pair of quavers just into a straight crotchet. So I basically just got my ideas and then I pasted them into a pattern. So let's have a look at this pattern. It starts off pretty simply with just some semi-breves, and then it goes to this root pattern of the crotchet and the dotted minim. So that's a different pattern, and you can see that I did that in the introduction, and I also did that a lot in the A section. But in the very final bar of the A section, I did something a little bit busier with an arpeggio to lead forwards into the next section. That's also the first time we see that dotted minim crotchet rhythm, which is the same as the melody. Then there's this one, dotted crotchet with a quaver tied to a minim. That's all the way through the introduction and also heavily used all the way through the A section. And I've used this pale bluey one, which was straight from my collection of online patterns, but I made the bass line super simple, just a root and fifth. And then I just pasted it in again and again, except right at the end, on the very last end of A3, I changed the chord, put a pause and a rit, and then did a little tag where I repeated the last phrase, spread it out and made it a bit longer, just to sort of end off a little bit. So then I was left with the B section, which was a bit vexing because my A sections were really quite busy and I didn't know what to do to try and make the B section really contrasting. So I decided to work in reverse. The A sections are reasonably loud and passionate, and I decided that the B section would be where the soldier's confiding his secret, which is that he's actually in love with the Queen. So I went really soft and very simple and just put straight semi-breves in the first bar. Little tiny crotchet there because there was nothing on beat 4. And then I started to do this rising bass line as he got more excited, and I got some syncopation. So that blue pattern I had used in the A section, but I only used it once in this whole B section. And I've got a bit of a crescendo. And then where he's saying she's the Queen, I've got these 4 big, loud block chords on minims, which wasn't an idea. That's just what Sibelius Realize gave me. But I liked it. It sounded like a sort of a big march when he's talking about she's the Queen. And I also put a C7 to F, perfect cadence, in there to make her sound sort of important and royal. And then when he's saying I'm a simple serving man, I just did a simple semi-breve with an arpeggio mark on it. And then I did that ending idea again, which I'd used before, but I thought I could get away with it once more. So in total, there was probably really only about 2 or 3 ideas, but I actually separated the right and left hands out so I could mix up the bass lines. So sometimes I put this rhythm with a plain semi-breve bass line, other times I put this rhythm with a crotchet dotted minim, and other times I put this rhythm with its original bass line, which was TT3. But what I'm hoping you can see is that they get slightly busier towards the end of sections, and they start more simply, and they get a little bit busier towards the end of the section. And the other thing I was also bearing in mind is what's happening in the melody. Typically, you don't want to be the same as the melody most of the time. You want a contrast. So where it's tum-ti-ta, during the tum, I've got da-da-da, and when there's a big long note, like me for 4 counts, I've got a bit of syncopation, bom, bar underneath it. But when there's something exciting going on in the melody, I've got almost nothing in the accompaniment. So I'm trying to sort of balance where the melody has lots of rhythm, the accompaniment doesn't have so much, and this idea of fills at the end of sections where the rhythm becomes more complex towards the end of the section and then simplifies itself at the beginning. It just provides more clarity to the overall structure. Remember, in this I also put the non-chordal notes in so you could really see which ones didn't belong to the chord. So sometimes, like right here, I put a non-chordal note on the very first bit, but of course I resolved immediately to a chordal note, and sometimes I put them in a different place. This was a bit of a risk, this big leap of a major 7th, but I was trying to convey his sort of surprise and slight anguish because he's secretly in love with her. The Queen has asked me. Okay, so I'm going to do a really bad performance because I'm not actually a soldier and so I don't have a proper low voice. My Queen has asked me to find this troll's name. He really is cruel and quite insane. I'll find this foul fiend. I'll save her child's life. My penance, my quest for my chatelaine, and she'll never know my love, how my heart burns for her. She is the Queen, I'm a simple serving man. I long to find peace by serving my Queen. She's graceful but cursed and full of pain. Full of pain. Okay then. That's probably not my best ever effort. There's a couple of notes that were a little bit hard to sing, but that's all I've got time for. I made a couple of minor changes to the rhythm just so I could get form I. I used some secondary dominant chords. I'm basically sort of in C minor, sort of in C major. I used a mixture of chords from those things. So here's a nice secondary dominant, E7 to A minor. And in the B section I used an A major chord, which was very chromatic, and then an A augmented, which was totally out there, but that's sort of like a dominant to D minor. And then I used this, C7 to F, a secondary dominant, and then a minor 4 chord from C minor, a dominant 7th of C minor, which was a good spot to have a dominant 7th because it cadences back into C minor. And in this final bit, instead of arriving at C minor where all the other A sections started and finished, I ended up on chord 6, the A flat major chord, and then I didn't resolve properly until here. There's no real way of showing you more than this, so I'll just quickly say what I did. I found some ideas. I split them up into bass lines and right-hand chord patterns. I collected them in a file originally, which I then pasted across into this file in my ideas bank, and I gave them a name and a colour so I could keep track of where I was up to. And, you know, you can go in and edit them at any time, that's no problem. And then I literally just simply pasted them and listened and pasted and listened and pasted and listened until they matched the Sibelius export answer. Yeah, until the notes were correct. And if I wanted to double check it, I could realise them again. I can tell they are because I can hear that they're right. So hopefully that makes sense. And then once you've finished with it, you can get rid of, and you've got your final piece, which is good, and you can do the final export. If you were doing the optional record method, then I would suggest exporting it and recording the voice in Mixcraft. So that would be the final absolute A+ grade 12 approach to this type of a song assignment, but you probably may not have time to get to that level, and that's okay. So hopefully you can see now what we have learnt. How to use Mixcraft loops. We've learned how to orchestrate a piano vocal score assignment, and now we are using existing rhythms and piano accompaniment patterns and making a new song with new melodies and new chords. And you're in year 10. So think about how you could combine all of those. You could, for example, not now, but I'm talking about in the future. You could write something like a song in Sibelius, although it wouldn't have to be a song, it could be a piece for violin and piano, or just a piece with a melody and a piano accompaniment. Then you could channel your term 2 skills and orchestrate that for full orchestra, and then you could export it individually to audio and put it in Mixcraft and add some extra percussion loops and other interesting sort of synth sounds into the bigger arrangement. And that's sort of where we might be aiming to get to in year 12. So hopefully this pain will then allow you in the future to have a lot of creative ways of using software to come up with a really good final product.